All right. So, yeah, this is our second week with cohort 10 for R4DS 2E. And today, in a minute, Luke is going to lead us in a discussion of chapter 2. First up, just the housekeeping. We have people signed up through the beginning of December through chapter 7. So, like I think I mentioned before, I recommend everyone trying to get in and claim a chapter to present. And people are signing up. So if there's something in particular you really want to learn, presenting it is like the best way to learn it. And I can see someone hopped in already, but I'm going to share that in the chat. But that is the spreadsheet to sign up. Next week, Gabby will be presenting chapter 3, workflow basics. And that's really all we have for house. Well, I guess the last thing for housekeeping is November 3rd, we won't meet because at that point in time, Europe will have ended summertime, but the US won't have ended daylight savings. And so we'll be out of sync. And so we just skip that week across all the R4DS clubs to avoid those issues as much as possible. Still have issues with places that don't switch, but we do the best we can. And then on the 24th, that's the day after Thanksgiving in the US. A lot of people will be traveling and otherwise just kind of busy. So I have us down to skip that one. As far as I can see, that's probably all we have to skip because just from a quick look, at least, it doesn't look like anything else really falls on holidays. We can talk about it as we get closer, whether we want to skip like December 22nd or anything in there. Yeah, so without further ado, Luke will lead us for chapter 2.
All right. Yep, I get to present what I jokingly call the gateway drug of the tidyverse. So we're dealing with a lot of ggplot here and data visualization in this chapter. So a lot of what we'll be doing is looking at kind of, the beginnings of plots with ggplot, figuring out how to map different aesthetics and different geom layers onto our plot. Kind of using the tools within ggplot to visualize distributions and relationships in our data, because not everything can just be looked at and be like, oh, well, this is left skewing. We'll also figure out how to deal with busier plots by using the facet or small multiples. And if you see this plot to the right, by the end of this, you'll be able to know how it's made. So let's jump in. Hey, the button worked. All right. So as we mentioned in the first chapter, the way that you install packages is using the install.packages and then the package name within quotes, if we've not done that yet. So you'd want to put tidyverse in quotes if you haven't before, but you only have to do this once. But as far as loading a package, every time you hop in to an R session, you will want to use the library and package name without quotes to load the package at the very beginning. So you can see I did that here with tidyverse, and it, as it did last week for John, it loaded up dplyr, forcats, and a bunch of other packages from the tidyverse. And there's a couple extras that we needed for this week, and that was Palmer Penguins, which has our data set, and GG themes, which can help make things look a lot prettier in ggplot. So the first thing I did was go ahead and take a look at the Palmer Penguins, and within it, there's a command called penguins that just pulls up the data set in tibble form. And the cool thing is the very first line, you can see A, that it's a tibble, and B, you get the dimensions for it. So we know that there are 344 rows and 8 columns. And it actually tells you what type of variable each one of them is, as well as the name of it. So you see FCT for factor, DBL for double, which is basically a number that you can use with a decimal point, and then int for whole numbers. So a lot of times if you're trying to figure out what exactly variable is off the top, that's probably the good first place to look. So the first step in creating a ggplot is going to be the ggplot call. And this will often take 2 arguments, as we'll see here. The first one tends to be your data, which again, we said that data set was within that penguins call. So we're literally just pointing it to penguins. And then the aesthetics that you want to map things to. And that goes within this AES call, which is short for aesthetics. But you can see the 2 that will always be in here for, well, not always, but the 2 that are most commonly like in here the most are X and Y. So, and that's mostly to set up your axes. So we see flipper length in millimeters here and body mass in grams here. And I went ahead and hit, yeah, Gabby, I like Glimpse for taking a preview with the data set as well. So what we see here, just calling this, we got our axes, but that is all we got. We didn't get any points yet. And that is because we have to add a geome to it. So you can see the ggplot call is the exact same as it was previously, but what we did is we added geome point. And that tells it, okay, all of these rows that you see in here, I want you to create a point for every matching X and Y that are in a row. And so that is how we end up getting all of these lovely dots in our scatter plot. And you can see this warning right here tells us that 2 rows were containing missing values. And because there is no way to plot missing values, it is giving us heads up, hey, these 2 things are not going to show up. So it's just kind of a kind little heads up that R is giving us. So one thing I talked about was adding aesthetics and layers, and that is how we get things A, prettier, B, a little bit more complex, so we can tell better stories. So first up is the aesthetics, which tend to be the visual properties of the plot. So think like we already saw coordinates X and Y, there's also line width, shape, color, alpha, which is the same as transparency, and a good ton of others, the way that the legend shows up. And sometimes there's some of these that are specific to the geome that you're calling. So here we have 3 aesthetics. We call the X aesthetic, the Y aesthetic, and the color aesthetic. And we can see that our X and our Y's still plot the where, but the color is split up by the species variable within our penguins data. So you see over here, our Adelies are red, our chin straps are green, and our Gentus are blue. And on top of adding layers to plots, or adding aesthetics to plots, you can also add layers to plots. So that would just be adding another geome type layer onto our call. So here we see what we started with before, all the way through geome point is what we had previously. What we did, as well as we did with the end of the ggplot call, is we added a plus to tell it, hey, I'm not quite done yet. I want you to add this geome point. And then we told it, hey, I'm still not done. Let's add a smooth line. And I want you to use the method of LM, which is short for linear method or linear model. And you can see that it gave us these 3 different lines split up by the different species. And here's a look at some of the other functions that are available. If you've seen a lot of ggplots, you're probably familiar with a good number of them. So there's point, line, smooth, which is what was used here for the kind of trend line, histogram, box plot, map, and text and labels. And they all have their own neat parts to play. So one thing we should point out is the idea of global aesthetics versus local aesthetics. So what you've seen us toy with so far has been mostly global aesthetics, where you saw the X, the Y, and the color all under the ggplot call. And basically what happens there is that because we called these in what we call our global layer, these things that you see here, unless we say something in a lower call to kind of counter them, these will apply to all of the layers. So that's why you see we have 3 lines. We have 3 trend lines as well as 3 dot plots. When it comes to local aesthetics, those tend to be called in the geom layers. So you can see the difference here is that we, instead of having the color in the ggplot call, as we did over here, we now have moved it to the geom point call with its own AES color equals species. And what that did is it said, hey, I only want this differentiation by color to show up in the plot layer or in the point layer. And so you can see that we have, as a result, one single trend line because it's still going off of the globals, which do not mention any kind of splitting up by species. But the points here have their own local call for that color. So basically, if there's something that you want to have applied to every layer, it's you can put it in the ggplot call, but if you want it to be just apply to one layer, it's usually best to put it in the local one, which can take a while to catch on to at times. So next thing is looking at accessibility. So one of the things that was advised in the book is that, maybe instead of just mapping the color, maybe you want to also map the shape when you have the ability. And on top of that, we all know that colorblind friendliness includes a colorblind friendly palette. So we went ahead and added those. So you can see here that we've got our ggplot call. Wait, we're not done yet. Let's add a geom point, but we're going to have the color split by species as well as the shape dependent on species. So you can see that in this little legend here. And then our smooth line is still a linear. And then we went ahead and used, I believe this is under GG themes, right, John? The scale colorblind. I think that's why that's in there. But
yes, I had to think. I checked that this morning because I wasn't sure where it was because I've used other things before. Didn't know about colorblind, so I like that one.
But yeah, that is how we got everything in here, and it looks just like it was on the intro page. So we've got everything needed to do that. But hey, while we're talking about accessibility, we can also add labels so that our plot reads like a human would read it. So we can add another layer called labs. And within it, it has subcommands for title, or I guess arguments is the word, sorry. Title and subtitle, and then X, which would give you the X axis label, Y would give you the Y axis label. And then we also went ahead and used our color and our shape. And because they have the same exact name, they show up with a shared legend here. So again, here's the titles here, your subtitles here, Y label, X label, and our legend. And that makes it so that, actual humans can read our plot instead of just, oh, yeah, let me peek and, okay, I think I know what they're saying. So I'm probably not going to run through all of the exercises here. This one we already talked about, that we could figure out the dimensions. Were there any of the exercises that anybody struggled with in particular? If not, I'm just going to kind of look through and.
I don't know if you saw my edits in number 3 here. That like this is a preview for a future exercise, because if you just do the plot as that with just X and Y, maybe there's a trend there. It's hard to say. And so we'll see in, I think it's the 3rd set of exercises revisits that plot.
Okay.
It does look like there's some clustering or something. So
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think we have an idea of what it is, probably species, but that's kind of cool.
Let's see. We also had the idea of taking species, which was basically a categorical, and putting it on the x-axis with a numerical, gave us basically what looked like a dot plot here. And I was recommending just using a box plot instead for that. Let's see. And you probably saw, as we saw with that error, it showed up again because we still have those NA rows. This is actually something that was completely new to me to learn, was how you would fix it. Oh, wait, different error.
I will
So,
say with the geom box plot, I'm not sure if anyone else ever overlays like a geom jitter with it, but I noticed that it doubly counts the outliers. So
oh,
I didn't notice that until I submitted an article once, and like you have like 15 patients, but I see 17 on the they counted the dots and they saw there were 17 dots. But I'm impressed that they did that. But I realized that you have to do like a shape NA or something when you use the geom box plot, which I never noticed before.
that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what are they called when you have like is that a B swarm plot? Is that what they call them?
I probably has a better. I just call them geom jitters, but that sounds way cooler. A B swarm plot. So
I think that's when you have a box plot and the scatter plot is what the B swarm is. But
cool.
I may just be making that up. Okay, here's what I was thinking about. Why do we get the message about the problem that was coming out back up here? How do we kind of silence this? And the answer to that is that if we add onto our geom point this na.rm equals true, it will quit warning us about that. But you don't want to do that by default. You want to make sure that something, okay, I'm aware of the fact that these are going to show up, or that there are two that are going to be missing. So it's nice to have the warning there as a default, and then if you don't need it, you can NARM true it. Or conveniently with all the Quarto stuff, you can tell it warnings and messages false. But that is for a much later chapter. So this question added another command to our labels. So we had the argument for caption as well in here. And it looks like this down here. You can also, there's also alt text, I believe. I think it's just alt equals. So if you're really stepping up your game for accessibility, then there you go. Recreate the following visualization. Let's see. What I ended up doing was data is still penguins, and I had our X and Y as our globals. Then I did the point with our aesthetic specific color there being the build depth. And geom smooth, I did a low S just because I could tell from the curving that it wasn't linear. So I went with a low S, and I guess there was still there's still a error bar on it. So, or an error padding is what I mean. This is the one that doesn't have error padding because we had SE equals false. Okay. But yeah, this is kind of the situation where even though you see that geom smooth, you have to remember that because we have called color up here in the global, we're going to get 3 lines again. But if we called it locally, it would be just 1 line.
Oops, I didn't do the right thing with the
Oh, you meant to put it
before
between them.
scrolling down. Yeah.
Oh well. And so this one gets exactly to the issue of global versus local, and you can see that here they put everything in the global, and then they just kind of doubled up here on the locals. They even put the data in separately into the locals, and you get the same plot for both. So it's, if anybody else works in healthcare, it's just like using Epic. You can do the same thing 6 different ways. So now we get to our ggplot calls, and the first thing we're going to point out is that a lot of times you will see that data equals and mapping equals dropped from the calls, but things will still work just fine. So instead of saying data equals penguins, a lot of times for brevity, people will just say ggplot penguins, and it's just kind of a common convention that the first argument is going to be your data set, and you won't see mapping equals, and they just jump in with their AES. But I think mentally, if it helps you, you're welcome to leave them in there. So this is where we start talking about one of the superpowers of ggplot, which is starting to visualize distributions. So when you're using categorical variables, box plots tend to be your best friend, and that can often be called with just one single aesthetic and geom bar. When it comes to dealing with numerical variables, your friend tends to be the histogram. You may have to toy with your bin width or just the number of bins, but you can eventually get to a point where you get a good idea of what your data actually looks like. And this, again, is just one aesthetic. It doesn't have X and Y. It can just have X or Y. Another one that can work for numerical is the density plot. So imagine somebody just like had a giant spaghetti noodle and dropped it over your data. I thought there was, okay, maybe that's another section. And just in case you're wondering what it looks like if you use the Y instead of the X in your bar plot, you get horizontal bars. And here we get a little bit of fun dealing with some of our aesthetics outside of the actual AES call. So there are times where you may just say, you know what, I want, part of this to be red, and I don't want it to be related to a particular variable. And instead of putting it within the AES inside of your call, you just call it by itself. So color equals red. But when you're dealing with box plots, color equals is going to get you just the border around the bar. So if you're trying to make the whole thing red, you're going to want to use fill equals red. And this
I have done that color instead of fill so many times. Like, it's a very common I don't know, typo or however you want to look at it for me.
Yeah, kind of, if you can't figure out why your thing is not filling, just kind of squint and look at the look at the edges of your bars, and you're like, oh crap, I did it again. Yep. But only on days that end in Y. This is so I was talking about the bins argument. If you don't know like a specific amount of the data that you want to be within a bar, you can just say, you know what, I want 20 bins, and we'll see what 20 bins looks like. So I end up using that a lot more than I do actual bin width that was presented in the chapter. You see our next, Our next example looks at the diamonds data set. And so this was kind of an example of needing to know what you want for a bin width. So I tried 1, 0.1, and then 100th. So here with a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we get an okay picture of what is going on. But if we make it to a 10th, we get a better picture of what we're actually seeing in the data. But when I brought it to 100th, yes, that's a even lot more detail, but it is so overwhelming that it almost hurts your eyes to look at.
You also have a lot of like spike and then trough and then spike and then trough. And, those are just random differences, not real like differences in the distribution, probably.
But I have noticed that playing with that number of bins could be really important sometimes, because sometimes the default hides what's going on. Like there was a time when I was looking at the patient follow-up times, and it looked as though there were actually spikes every 7 days, but you wouldn't see it unless you broke it down into like the within day bin level or something.
And that's where like knowing what the data is can make a big difference. Every once in a while, I've had things where I'm like, oh yeah, there's this trend, and it's like, oh no, that's just like, that's 1/10 or 1/5, or it's the thing that is possible to show up. And so you have to watch out for tricky, don't make the bin width so small that you're just collecting things that are all basically, that's the only division they can be, really.
To colors, I'm often inclined to change colors in bar plots and histograms because there's so much black often. But then it's sometimes a dilemma. Will I combine color and fill? For example, where you could make them white, but then they don't stand out, and so on. It's not easy.
Yeah, as long as the color doesn't have meaning that you're trying to get from the border, in almost all cases. There's always an exception, but
yeah, one thing that, like, going through the chapter when they said, for better colorblind accessibility, do shape as well as color map to the same thing. I was kind of like, in your head, that kind of goes against some of the things you're taught about data viz. It's like, no differentiations that don't have their own separate use. But I'm like, okay, I can see why it's important to break that rule.
Yeah, my brother-in-law is colorblind, and I had never noticed that a lot of like board games will have, like if you have a color of a certain card or token or something, that it'll also have a shape that I didn't even notice was there, because it's for the colorblind players. I mean, for everybody really, but especially for colorblind. So I liked that he pointed out that same idea, or they pointed out, because it's not necessarily Hadley.
Yeah, I think if the categories match, then it's not really a problem. It's but it can be more complex when they overlap, and then it's a struggle, I think.
I'm suddenly wondering if there's a shape on the Uno cards I've been missing all this time.
I don't think Uno has shapes, but actually newer sets might. I don't know.
Right, Gabby, yeah. A lot of times with grayscale, the fill by itself is not enough. I remember doing that from print journalism when we were doing graphics. So on top of visualizing the distributions, it's also really nice that we can visualize relationships with ggplot, and that's a lot of what we saw with those scatter plots before. And we should make sure I didn't skip. Okay. So when it comes to maybe you're comparing a numerical variable and a categorical, one of the best tools that you have in your toolbox from ggplot is the box plot here. And this is called with just an X and a Y. Obviously, you can add other aesthetics as needed, but that was all that was absolutely necessary here. When it comes to looking at two categorical variables, that's where our buddy the bar plot comes back in, and you can even add a little bit of fill to help things out. And if the proportions end up meaning more to you than necessarily the counts, within geom bar, there is a argument that is position, and we can just make it position equals fill, and that will give us proportions instead of counts. So you can see over here, we're getting from 0 to 1, and that is our percentages. But the classic when it comes to two numerical values is our scatter plot that we've seen 6,000 times in this chapter already. When it comes to 3 or more variables, that is when all of these aesthetics really start to come into play. So here you can see that we use the color to differentiate species. So you got your red is a deli, green is chin strap, blue is gentoo, and then our shape is also mapped to something else. So that would be the island here. So if it's a bisco, it's a circle. If it's a dream, it's a triangle, and it's Torgerson, it is a square. But you can see this is already starting to get really busy. So another thing we can do is create small multiples with the facet wrap call. And this can really help us kind of, see things that maybe we couldn't see when everything was all mushed together in one big graph. Instead, we decided to facet wrap by island. So we just added another plus, and then we said facet wrap, and the tilde, you can just imagine I'm saying facet wrap by island. And that is how we end up getting what looks like the population for each island by species. Why we still have the shape there, I'm not certain, but hey, whatever. Or I mean, well, oh wait, this one is, okay, it's double icy now. Never mind. So yeah, this one ended up being a lot more colorblind friendly than the one above, because instead of having separates for the shapes and the colors, they were able to map the same thing to shape and color because they facet wrapped by island. I missed that the first time I was reading through.
Yeah, I missed it reviewing as well. But it's, again, it's really useful to do that. Don't try not to rely purely on color. Like if you're making it for yourself and you can see the color differences, then okay, that's fine. But if you're trying to communicate it with other people, color blindness is super common. So being aware of it is a good idea.
Indeed. Let's see. Trying to remember if any of these were particularly. You can see okay, this demonstrated the way that color changes depending on what type of variable you feed it. So because it was a numerical, it ended up going in a gradient format. Whereas if we were to feed it a, sorry, let me scroll down here. If you were to feed it a categorical one, it just gets divergingly different colors. Or that's not the word for it. Comparatively different colors, so that you can tell that difference apart a bit more quickly. And so we can see that we can also make size dynamic. That only worked with numeric, I believe. And here's where it started to get really busy again, because I mapped year to one and color to another. And this was just pointing out that I also added manufacturer as a different shape style. And it was like, A, you don't want to use more than 6 shapes, but B, why are you doing this with a categorical? Or wait, no, it was the other way around, but yeah. So in a scatter plot, what happens if you map a third variable to line width? It won't do anything because there's not a line. Oh, Gabby says if you have more than 6 shapes, use scale shape manual. All right. And we've already seen what happens if you map one thing to multiple aesthetics. You make things a lot more disability friendly. Sorry, I'm sitting here trying to remember if I need to cover each one of these or not. But this again shows the importance of how faceting can make things way less busy for you. This is what John was saying. So you remember we had this in black and white earlier, and it was a hot mess. But adding color alone got us the idea of the species, but it's still kind of busy. So when we went and split it up by the species, you can get a better idea of the groupings and how they're different, because they're all the same grid that they're up against, but now you can kind of see how each individual group has its own kind of shape.
If you think about it, it's build depth versus build length. That together, those are, shape. So if you have each penguin has some general shape of, is it a short stubby beak or a long and thin beak or whatever, and then variability within that general idea. So it makes sense, and it's cool to see.
All right, this one tripped me up for a second, so I'm going to go through it for sure. Why does the following yield two separate legends, and how would you combine the two? So we see here that we've got two legends, one for species, and the second one for color-related species. And that is because we have labs color equals species. Well, first we have multiple aesthetics called up here in the global. So we have color equals species and shape equals species. But down here in labs, we only call out color equals species. And we also do it with a capital S instead of a lower s, which we're allowed to do because we have it in quotes here in the labs. So what it's doing is it's seeing these as two separate things. So in order to fix that, what we did was we went into the labs. First, we made it specific to the geome point so that it's only a local aesthetic. And then we went ahead and added color equals species and shape equals species, spelled the same with the same capitalization, and that fixed it so we only have one legend. And Donald's like, that's one of the things I always have to re-Google. Yep. Why the crap is it doing this? Let me check Google. That is half my life.
Google, like every ggplot question is on Google, or is indexed on Google. It's on Stack Overflow probably. So it's, if you are running into something, Googling it almost always will help. And at this point, actually, large language models also have a lot of ggplot code, so they might also help.
Right. This question was a little fun because it was like, it was confusing to have to put words to, but basically we made two different ggplots. One, the X is island, the fill is species, and we had a proportional bar plot here. And the other one, your X is species, the fill is island, and then we did the fill on that. So it was not an enviable job putting this into words, but the first tells us which species make up certain proportions of an island's overall population. So basically looking at the island being like, okay, well, this one is 100% Adelie, this one is about half and half, and then this one is 3/4 Gentoo and 1/4 Adelie. But this one down here at the bottom is telling us how a species' overall population is split among the islands. So we see that Gentoo is the only thing on Bisco, Chinstrap's the only thing on Dream, and then everything's mixed together, where Adelies are everywhere. Or Adelies are, yeah, that's right. Wow, my brain. All right. So next up, this is something that I struggle with a lot, is remembering how to save the plots. And it's pretty important considering that most of the people you want to share your plots with don't use R. So ggSave is going to be your best friend. And the way that we use it is actually its own call. You see, there's not a plot after, or there's not a plus after geome point here. This is its own command. So it's ggSave file name equals, and then you give it a file name. And there are a lot of different file types you can put on it. Off the top of my head, there's PDF, PNG, JPEG, EPS, if you are really into like printing. And then it's always nice to have a width on here or a height, and as well as a type of unit. That way that you ensure that it's coming in at like a visible, it's coming in at a visible proportion for you. And you're not going to like hit save and then open it and you have like a 300 width version and you're like, oh crap.
Would it be that PDF hasn't always been there in ggSave? I think former times you had to use the PDF device to print to PDFs, and I used ggSave for PNGs.
No.
Or I have never known, perhaps.
I mean, it's well, that is one of the arguments you can add is device equals PDF. So maybe
Yes.
it's specific to maybe that's specific for PDF. I've had luck most of the time with just being able to put dot whatever version I'm using, but I also don't save ggplots in PDF very often, so you might be right there that it still requires the device argument for that.
I didn't mean the device argument. I meant the PDF device outside of base R actually. But I think that PNG in perhaps 10 years ago or more was that PDF wasn't yet there in the ggSafe. Anyway, it was new to me to learn that you can now save plots as PDF with ggSafe. It's cool.
Yep. And let's see if there's anything that was, where's the two plots it's saved at? So this one probably worth pointing out that part of the ggSave that you don't necessarily see in the command is that when you go and you don't specify a particular plot for it to take, like let's pretend we called this one myplot1 and myplot2. Because you don't call a specific plot for it to save, it is going to take the one that you last ran. So it is going to take what is essentially myplot2 here. And that'll be what it saves. And here's looking at the function documentation. There's EPS, PS, which is that a Photoshop version? Text, PDF, JPEG, TIFF, I've not seen in forever. Ping, bitmap, SVG, shout out to everybody who has Illustrator and WMF. All right, so there are going to be problems putting together your ggplot. Everybody screws up, even Hadley. And he wrote this stuff along with Garrett and Mine. So some of the things that maybe your issue is maybe you mismatch some parentheses or maybe some quote marks. And if you're using RStudio, definitely turn on the rainbow parentheses. Those have saved me so many times. I don't remember where it is in the options, but if you don't have rainbow parentheses, look for it somewhere in the options. Another thing that will often happen to me is I will put the plus in the wrong spot. I'll accidentally put it on the start of a new line instead of the end of the previous line. And then I will sit there and swear I'm like, I wrote this whole thing correctly. All the commands are there, but that's the one thing that's off. Or, as has probably been the bane of everybody's existence here, maybe you just misspelled something and it took you 6 hours to figure out. This literally happened to me 3 weeks ago. Like I went up, got lunch, came back, and I was like, are you kidding? But when you run into problems, some of the things you can do is read the error and try to get hints from that. Google the error message and try to get a better context from there. Look up the actual documentation for the package or the function. Ask your R friends, and most importantly, don't give up because everybody runs into this crap. It's not just you. Somebody else has struggled through this, and you'll live. So that is everything that I had from this chapter, and you now know how to do all these fun, funky things, like make simple plots with ggplot, apply aesthetics and geom layers, look at your distributions and your relationships, facet things, and make this really dope and colorblind-friendly plot. Ta-da! Oh, I'm going to point out this really good, like Gina Reynolds' ggplot flipbook is probably one of my favorite like illustrations of how ggplot works.
It's so funny you're sharing this because I slacked John over today asking if I could share this, not having read that you already posted this in the resources. This is an amazing piece of work.
This is something that like I come back to over and over again. So this here we're looking at Christmas tree data. This is an example of it. So you got like a year, number of trees, but she goes through and does the ggplot step by step. So first you add in your call for data and you see we don't really get anything other than a gray box. Then you add your aesthetic for the X and then for the Y, and now we've got a grid. Then you added on the points. then added the aesthetics for the colors for the type of tree. Then we got our smooth lines, which where is that? And then manual color. But yeah, it's just kind of, if you're ever wondering like, well, why do I have to, type X or Y in? This is a really great like example to look back at. It's like, oh, that's why it matters. Okay.
And it's like she shows how to split apart any ggplot using this package that she made. So like you can generate these split books automatically from your code to see what is each piece doing.
Yeah.
And she's also, I forgot that she's demonstrating a trick that I like. It's weird and technically isn't anything they advertise, so it could break at any time, but you can just plus aesthetic on as if you're putting it in the main ggplot call. I like to do that if, like, sometimes I'll set up just ggplot data equals DTA or whatever, like set up the thing with the data, save that as something, and then plus different things onto that to create different plots. So you can, you can make objects that you're with all the shared properties combined. I wasn't going to bring it up because it's weird and I don't know, a distraction for a lot of people, but it was something that I kind of accidentally found that you could do, and it can be helpful, especially for something like this where you're trying to explain every piece. So
yeah, as I was sitting there like trying to like give color commentary as we were going down, I'm like, and that's interesting, and then just like I should probably not try to explain that one right now, and kept going.
yeah, you can just add on an aesthetic, and it can be really helpful to help you understand what is each one doing. What does it mean to set it, and it's the same as setting it in ggplot, so it's setting it globally, although technically I guess you're setting it globally, I think, at that point in the chain. So if you add it after a geom, it's global for everything else. I think. I'm not sure that I've ever actually done that. But yeah, like the call equals fact reverse type of tree, that comes after the geom point. And I think it actually did apply to the point. I don't know. It's yeah, it did apply to the point. So I guess it doesn't really matter the order. Yeah.
I think more than anything, it was demonstrating that, hey, you can do it at any point. But yeah, there's another like, this reminds me of like the Tidy Tuesday, people who you see doing like the camera
Yes.
art package or whatever. I could watch those for days, I think.
I love that package that the crew on that. I don't want to, I can't remember everyone. I think it's Ellis and Giorgio and Cedric. I can't remember who all worked on that, but they made that package that it's purely just recording like what goes into your view tab in our studio, so you can put together a little animation of your thought process as you were making a plot. I will pull that up while people are talking about anything else.
I'm looking through the chat, make sure I didn't miss anything. All right. But yeah, is there anything that kind of, was an aha moment for anybody or a struggle point?
I did have
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I like that this is the first like real chapter in the book is, make pretty visualizations. Because that's, the point is that is something that's really easy to do in R thanks to ggplot. So take advantage of it.
It reminds me of the video games where they give you all the superpowers in the first level and then they strip them away.
Yeah.
I was wondering, so I've been using R for a while, and before lathes, there was ops, OPTS, and then they replaced it. But then there's also GG title, which you can just edit the title. I was curious if anyone knows which one's like more status quo for R, because I know GG title is technically from ggplot as well. I'm assuming just use labs all the time instead.
If there's a right answer, I'm not sure.
I don't think there is really a right answer. It's easier to remember the one label function, and then it'll tell you what all you can label. So that's the only thing. I think, you know, their code has started to kind of coalesce around using labs for all the labels. But it's hard to say. I don't think, like, for something like ggplot, pretty much nothing is ever going to go away. They just might not develop it any further. But if they remove something, that breaks like thousands of web pages. And so they don't want to do that. So even if they make something else that is the preferred way to do it, they'll keep the old way working. And, you know, there's an asterisk on that, but for the most part, I can't think of a case where they wouldn't do that. That's why ggplot2 exists, because he had some things he wanted to change in ggplot. So he made ggplot2. It's kind of funny, actually. If anyone's curious about that, like, he made ggplot. Hadley Wickham made that as, I think it was his like graduate thesis, was about visualizing data, and he made this ggplot package. A lot of people started using it, and he like decided there were some huge mistakes he had made, and so he wanted to make a new one, but all these people were using it, so he made ggplot2. And so now, like, one of the most common packages in R is ggplot2. ggplot, the original, I don't think is on CRAN anymore, but he resurrected. There is a ggplot1, and I don't think that's on CRAN. No, but there's a GitHub repository where he has played around with ggplot1, which is the original ggplot code, very slightly tweaked, and it actually works with the pipe, versus ggplot2, you have to use plus instead of the pipe. And just out of the box, it works with the pipe. So I don't know, that's a curious R history thing. Let me make sure I'm not crazy. That, yeah, ggplot was removed from CRAN. It is still there in the archive, but it has been gone since 2008, apparently. Or at least the newest version was in 2008.
Also, behold all the other fun things that you can do with extensions to ggplot.
Yeah.
I can
All
show you
kinds of
the
crazy.
world.
Oh wow, I didn't know this. Some of these plots existed. These are crazy. That 3D plot, that's insane.
Yeah, there's all kinds of you know, anything that you want to do basically exists. Yeah, so that is, he can just copy and paste that, but yeah. It is very I don't know, it can be fruitful if you can't find these things. Tidyverse.org, or going into their GitHub organization, github.com/tidyverse, and poking around, you can find all their cool things. But yeah, there's that shared. Yeah, GG pattern is there at the bottom right, where you can take an image and like use that as your fill. So that can let you do some pretty cool plots. I think that one's by Cool But Useless, if I remember right.
Yep.
Yeah. He makes crazy cool packages. Yeah, Mike FC.
This is another page you can just get lost in for days.
For sure.
GG Edit, aimed at interactively editing ggplot layers, scales, and themes. And it's what?
And GG Easy also those. Oh, I forgot. GG Edits. Yanni, he was my boss recently. And then GG Easy is Jonathan Carroll. That it's like it's built to help you learn all the ggplot options. So I don't know how strongly I recommend it because I haven't, like, it came out after I was kind of past it, but if you're new to ggplot, I think it's pretty good at helping you learn what's what.
Is that part of like the Easy Stats universe, or is that just
It's standalone.
okay?
Yeah, and I'm pretty certain that that's on CRAN. Yes, and actually it was updated in March, so it's not horribly out of date. Because I know that he made it like 4 years ago or so.
Ooh, there's one for networks.
And the thing that I like to see when people are making these new ggplot extensions is because of the way ggplot is built with the layered grammar, people make a new package and it like automatically works with all the other packages. So there's like GG Animate for making animated GIFs out of plots, and like it just works with all these extensions, and so you can have animated network graphs and all these different things. Go ahead and ask your whatever question you have, Esperance. Either in the chat. Go
Good
ahead.
evening, all. Yes, about facet wrap. I would like to show something. Can you go back to that slide?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can also open, yeah.
There we go.
Yes. At this level, I noticed that it's possible to free Y and X. And while we are freeing Y and X, I want to ask which argument can we use to not represent all the variable on X axis, on Y axis, because if I believe like the first subplot, if I believe that, okay, at that level, all the values or categories or counts or values on the y-axis are not involved or are not represented in the subplot, I want it to hide those values. I don't want it to represent it all at each subplot. I don't know where either you get my point. I face that challenge and I don't know which argument I will use. You know, for instance, when you take the dream, for instance, at 6,000, there is no data point there. So you will get what I'm saying if you free Y and X, and then from there we can try to solve my issue. Did you get my point, sir?
I think I get your point, and
So
I think
please,
that's going to be probably chapter 4 when we get into I think you would want to filter, so you would do that in the data outside of the plot, if I'm understanding the question. And
okay.
Yeah, so that we'll get there soon. It is doable.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think just to having, you know, a standard of comparison, I think that's why you have even these two go all the way up to 6,000 or 7,000.
All right.
Looks like we made the hour. Is there anything else we need to knock out?
I think we're good. So yeah, next week we'll do the first of these workflow chapters with led by Gabby.
All right.
everyone in the chat until then.
Great
All right.
discussion.